The war reporter's first shot. Sarah Chen adjusted her camera lens, focusing on the smoke rising from the distant alien settlement. The heat from Kepler 442b's twin suns made her sweat despite the cooling unit in her combat vest. She wasn't supposed to be this close to the front lines, but the story was here, not back at the safe zone. "Stay low, Chen," growled Sergeant Martinez, the leader of the Ranger squad she was embedded with. "These bug-eyed freaks have good eyes." The Zephyrians had been humanity's enemies for 3 years now. When first contact happened, everyone hoped for peace. Instead, the insectoid aliens saw humans as weak mammals and tried to claim Earth's colonies. The war started badly for humanity. The aliens were faster, stronger, and had better technology. Sarah had covered wars before, but only human conflicts. This was different. The stakes weren't just territory or resources. This was about survival. If humanity lost this war, there might not be a next generation to remember the stories she was documenting. Through her camera viewfinder, she watched the Rangers move with practiced precision. 12 soldiers, the best humanity had to offer. Each one had survived at least 50 combat missions against the Zephyrians. They moved like ghosts through the purple vegetation that covered this planet. "Contact ahead," whispered Corporal Jackson through the comm. 3 bugs, maybe 4, guarding the communication array. Sarah zoomed in with her camera. The Zephyrians stood 8 feet tall on 4 legs, their mantis-like heads turning constantly as they scanned for threats. Their weapons were sleek energy rifles that could cut through human armor like paper. She had seen what those weapons could do to human bodies. The images still haunted her dreams. Captain Torres, the squad sniper, took position behind a crystalline rock formation. His rifle was a marvel of human engineering, designed specifically to punch through Zephyrian carapace armor. Sarah filmed as he lined up his shot, waiting for the perfect moment. The shot was silent thanks to the suppressor, but deadly accurate. The first alien dropped without a sound. The other 3 spun around, confused and angry. Their compound eyes glittered in the alien sunlight as they searched for the threat. That's when everything went wrong. The attack came from underground. Zephyrian tunnel warriors erupted from beneath the Rangers' feet, their claws and teeth gleaming with poison. Sarah's camera captured the chaos as trained soldiers suddenly found themselves fighting for their lives at close quarters. Martinez went down first, a claw raking across his throat. Jackson managed to kill his attacker but took a poisoned bite to his leg. Within seconds, half the squad was down or dying. Sarah found herself pressed against a rock, her camera forgotten as survival instincts kicked in. She wasn't a soldier. She was a journalist, a documentarian, a storyteller. Her job was to watch and record, not to fight. But watching these brave soldiers die while she did nothing felt wrong. These Rangers had protected her for weeks, sharing their food, their jokes, their fears about loved ones back on Earth. They had become her friends, her brothers and sisters in arms. A Zephyrian warrior spotted her. It moved with terrifying speed, its 4 legs carrying it across the rocky ground like a nightmare spider. Its mandibles clicked with anticipation as it raised its clawed arms to strike. Sarah's hand found the sidearm that Torres had insisted she carry. "Just in case," he had said with a grin. "You never know when you might need to defend yourself out here." She had protested, saying she was a non-combatant protected by interstellar law. Torres had laughed. "The bugs don't care about your press credentials, Chen. They just see meat." Now, with death rushing toward her, Sarah understood what Torres meant. Her thumb flicked off the safety as she raised the pistol. The weapon felt heavy and unfamiliar in her hands. She had fired it once during the mandatory safety briefing, hitting the target twice out of 10 shots. The Zephyrian was 20 feet away when she fired her first shot. The bullet struck its shoulder, spinning it around but not dropping it. Black ichor sprayed from the wound as the creature shrieked in rage and pain. 18 feet, second shot. This one caught it in the thorax, cracking the chitinous armor but still not stopping its charge. 15 feet, third shot, a miss that sparked off the rocks behind the alien. 12 feet. She could see the intelligence in its compound eyes, the hatred for her species, the hunger for human blood. Fourth shot, fifth shot. Both hit center mass, and finally the creature stumbled. 8 feet. Sarah could smell the alien's acidic blood, could see the poison dripping from its claws. Sixth shot. The bullet found a gap in the creature's natural armor, penetrating deep into its body. The Zephyrian collapsed just 5 feet from where Sarah stood, its limbs twitching as life left its alien form. Sarah stared at the dead creature, her hands shaking. She had just killed her first living being. The weight of that moment pressed down on her like a physical force, but around her the battle still raged and more Rangers were dying. She looked at the pistol in her hand, then at the chaos surrounding her. 5 shots left in the magazine, 5 Rangers still fighting for their lives. For the first time in her career as a war correspondent, Sarah Chen stepped out from behind cover and into the fight. The reporter becomes a warrior. Sarah's 7th shot saved Private Morrison's life. The young soldier was pinned beneath a Zephyrian twice his size, the alien's claws inches from his face. Sarah's bullet caught the creature in the back of its head, dropping it instantly. Morrison rolled out from under the dead alien, his eyes wide with shock and gratitude. "Chen, what the hell are you doing?" "Trying not to die," Sarah replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. The adrenaline was doing something to her, sharpening her focus, making everything crystal clear. The battlefield had become a nightmare of screaming soldiers and chittering aliens. The Rangers' advanced weapons were useless in close combat. The Zephyrians had planned this ambush perfectly, using their tunnel networks to get within claw range before the humans could react. Corporal Jackson was fighting 3 aliens at once, his rifle useless, reduced to using his combat knife. Blood ran down his face from multiple cuts, and Sarah could see the poison from his earlier bite was slowing him down. His movements were becoming sluggish, uncoordinated. Sarah moved without thinking, her 8th shot taking down the leftmost Zephyrian. Jackson used the distraction to bury his knife in another alien's eye, but the 3rd one raked its claws across his back, sending him sprawling. The remaining Zephyrian turned toward Sarah, its mandibles spreading wide in what she had learned was their equivalent of a battle roar. This one was larger than the others, its carapace scarred from previous battles. An older warrior, experienced and deadly. Sarah's 9th shot hit its center mass, but the bullet bounced off its thick armor. The creature barely flinched, instead charging straight at her with terrifying speed. She dove to the side, rolling behind another rock as the alien's claws scraped against stone where she had been standing. Her heart pounded as she checked her ammunition. 2 shots left. The alien was smart. Instead of charging again, it began to circle her position, looking for an opening. Sarah could hear its claws clicking against the rocky ground, could smell the acidic stench of its blood from her earlier hit. "Chen, where are you?" Morrison's voice came through her comm unit. She had forgotten she was wearing one of the Rangers' communication devices. "Pinned down behind the tall crystal formation," she whispered back. "Big one armor's too thick for my pistol." "Keep it busy, I'm coming around behind it." Sarah popped up from cover and fired her 10th shot, deliberately aiming wide. The bullet sparked off a rock near the alien's head, making it flinch and turn toward her. She ducked back down as return fire from the creature's energy weapon turned the air above her head into superheated plasma. Morrison appeared behind the alien like a ghost, his combat knife finding the gap between the creature's head and thorax. The Zephyrian collapsed, black ichor pooling around its body. "Nice shooting," Morrison said, helping Sarah to her feet. "For a reporter." Sarah looked around the battlefield. The immediate threat was over, but the cost had been terrible. Half the Rangers were dead or dying. Martinez lay still, his sightless eyes staring at the alien sky. Jackson was alive but barely conscious, the poison working its way through his system. Captain Torres was still breathing, but a Zephyrian claw had opened his stomach. He was trying to hold his intestines in place while directing the surviving soldiers to defensive positions. "Chen," Torres called weakly, "come here." Sarah knelt beside the wounded sniper. Up close, she could see how pale he had become, how much blood he was losing. They both knew he wasn't going to make it. "The mission," Torres gasped. "We have to destroy that communication array. If the bugs call for reinforcements, the entire operation fails." Sarah looked toward their objective. The Zephyrian communication array stood 200 meters away, a crystalline structure that pulsed with alien energy. It was their target, the reason this squad had been sent so deep into enemy territory. "The demolition charges," Torres continued. "In Martinez's pack, someone has to get close enough to plant them." Morrison and the 3 other surviving Rangers were in no shape for another assault. Jackson was unconscious from the poison. The others were wounded and running low on ammunition. "I'll go," Sarah said quietly. Tors stared at her with disbelief. "You're not a soldier, Chen, you're a reporter." "I'm the only one who isn't wounded," Sarah replied, "and I still have one shot left." She took the demolition charges from Martinez's pack, studying the simple activation sequence Tors showed her. Red button arms the device, green button starts the timer. 60 seconds to get clear. "Chen," Tors grabbed her arm with surprising strength. "This isn't your war, you don't have to do this." Sarah looked at the dead rangers around her, young men and women who had died protecting not just her, but everyone back on Earth. She thought about all the stories she had covered, all the wars she had documented from the sidelines. "Maybe it's time it became my war," she said. The approach to the communication array was open ground, 200 meters of nothing but purple grass and scattered rocks. Sarah would be completely exposed. Any Zephyrians in the area would see her coming from a mile away. She checked her pistol one last time. One bullet. If she missed, if her final shot didn't count, then this would all be for nothing. Sarah took a deep breath and stepped out from cover. The alien grass crunched under her boots as she began to run toward her target, the demolition charges heavy in her backpack. Behind her, the surviving rangers watched in amazement as the war correspondent, who had spent weeks hiding behind rocks and filming their battles, suddenly charged across open ground toward an enemy position. She was 50 meters from the array when the first Zephyrian appeared. It rose from a concealed position, energy rifle already aimed at her chest. Sarah could see its compound eyes tracking her movement, calculating the lead needed for a killing shot. Time seemed to slow as Sarah raised her pistol for the 11th and final time. Everything she had learned about marksmanship in the past few minutes crystallized into this moment. Breathe, aim, squeeze. The shot was perfect. Hash when words become weapons. Sarah's 11th shot struck the Zephyrian between its compound eyes, the bullet penetrating its brain case with surgical precision. The alien dropped its energy rifle and collapsed forward, its body twitching once before going still. She didn't stop running. The communication array loomed ahead of her, its crystalline structure humming with alien technology. She could feel the energy radiating from it, making her skin tingle and her teeth ache. Behind her, more Zephyrians were emerging from concealed positions. She could hear their chittering calls to each other, coordinating their response to this unexpected human assault. Energy bolts began striking the ground around her, turning patches of purple grass into smoking craters. Sarah's empty pistol felt useless in her hand, but she kept it raised anyway. Sometimes the appearance of being armed was enough to make enemies hesitate. Every second of delay increased her chances of reaching the array. A blast of superheated air passed so close to her head that it singed her hair. Another shot struck the ground directly in front of her, forcing her to leap over the molten crater. The Zephyrians were finding their range. 20 meters to the array, 15-10. Sarah dove the final distance, rolling behind the base of the crystalline structure just as multiple energy beams converged on her previous position. The alien technology provided some cover, but she could hear the Zephyrians moving closer, their clawed feet clicking against stone. Her hands shook as she pulled out the demolition charges. The device was surprisingly simple, designed for soldiers to use under pressure. Red button to arm, green button to start the timer. Sarah pressed the red button. A small light began blinking, confirming the charges were active. Now she just needed to start the 60-second countdown and get clear. "Human," the voice came from above her, speaking in accented but understandable English. Sarah looked up to see a Zephyrian unlike any she had encountered before. This one was larger than the warriors, its carapace marked with intricate patterns that seemed to shift in the alien light. Some kind of officer or leader. "I know what you are," the alien continued, its mandibles clicking with each word. "War chronicler, storyteller, why do you fight? This is not your purpose." Sarah kept her hand near the green button while studying her enemy. The Zephyrian leader was staying out of reach, but close enough to kill her the moment she moved. Several warrior caste aliens flanked it, their weapons trained on her position. "You studied us," Sarah said, buying time. "You know about human culture." "Of course, know your enemy, as your species says. I have read your transmissions, watched your entertainment broadcasts. Humans separate fighters from chroniclers, soldiers from civilians. You maintain the fiction that some are innocent in war. The alien tilted its head in a gesture that might have been confusion or contempt. Yet here you are, storyteller who kills. You abandon your sacred neutrality to shed blood like any warrior. Sarah thought about all the conflicts she had covered, all the times she had hidden behind her press credentials while others fought and died. She had told herself she was serving a greater purpose, that documenting the truth was more important than picking sides. But sometimes the truth wasn't enough. Sometimes you had to choose between being a witness and being human. "You want to know why I fight?" Sarah asked. "Because I finally understand something. There are no neutral observers when one side wants to wipe out the other completely. When you're facing extinction, everyone becomes a soldier." The Zephyrian leader made a sound that might have been laughter. Spoken like prey trying to convince itself it has fangs. Your species is weak, divided. You wage war against each other over resources while we prepare to harvest your worlds. "Weak," Sarah smiled grimly. "You want to see human weakness? I'll show you human weakness." Instead of pressing the green button, Sarah stood up and stepped into the open. The Zephyrian warriors immediately tensed, but their leader held up a claw, ordering them not to fire. "My species is weak because we care about things that don't make logical sense," Sarah said, walking slowly toward the alien leader. "We care about strangers. We risk our lives for people we've never met. We tell stories about heroes who sacrifice everything for others." The Zephyrian tilted its head, genuinely curious now. "This is weakness, inefficiency, resources wasted on the genetically unrelated." "Maybe, but it's also why I'm standing here with enough explosives to destroy your communication array, talking to you instead of just pushing the button." A truly logical creature would have activated the charges immediately and tried to escape. Sarah was 10 feet away from the alien leader now, close enough to see the intelligence in its compound eyes. "You see, you made one mistake when you studied humanity. You learned about our wars, our weapons, our tactics, but you didn't understand our stories." "Stories are lies," the Zephyrian said dismissively. "Fiction irrelevant to survival. Stories are how we pass down what matters. They teach us what's worth dying for. And every human grows up hearing stories about ordinary people who become heroes when everything falls apart." Sarah pulled out her camera with her free hand, the device she had used to document so much suffering and courage over the years. "I've spent my career telling stories about warriors, brave soldiers who face impossible odds to protect others. I thought my job was to watch and record their heroism." She looked directly into the alien leader's eyes. "But today, I learned that sometimes the story chooses you. Sometimes you stop being the person who watches heroes and become the hero someone else will watch." The Zephyrian's mandibles spread wide. "You think yourself heroic? You are about to die for nothing. Even if you destroy this array, others will be built. Your species will still fall." "Maybe, but not today. Not here. And someone will tell the story of how hard we fought. How a war reporter fired 11 perfect shots and then chose to walk into certain death rather than run away." Sarah raised her camera and took a picture of the alien leader's surprised expression. The flash confused the creature for just a moment, but that was all Sarah needed. She pressed the green button on the detonator and smiled as the 60-second countdown began. "60 seconds, she announced calmly. "Plenty of time for your warriors to kill me, but probably not enough time for them to disarm military-grade human explosives." The Zephyrian leader's compound eyes widened as it understood the situation. Sarah Chen, war correspondent turned soldier, had just forced the most tactically advanced species in the galaxy into an impossible choice. Save their communication array by trying to disarm unknown human technology, or cut their losses and retreat to a safe distance. Either way, the mission would succeed. Either way, the story would have its ending, hash the story that changed everything. The Zephyrian leader's tactical mind raced through the options in seconds. 55 seconds left on the timer. Sarah could see the creature's compound eyes darting between her, the demolition device, and its own warriors. "You are bluffing," the alien decided. "Human explosives are crude, simple. My technical cast can disarm them." "Maybe," Sarah agreed, keeping her voice steady despite her racing heart. "But are you willing to bet this entire installation on maybe? Because I've seen what human demolition charges do to Zephyrian crystal structures. The blast doesn't just destroy the target. It sends resonant frequencies through your crystalline technology for kilometers in every direction. She wasn't bluffing about that part. She had filmed the aftermath of previous human sabotage operations. Zephyrian technology was incredibly advanced, but had one weakness. Their crystal-based systems were vulnerable to specific harmonic frequencies that human explosives happened to produce. The alien leader's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of stress that Sarah had learned to recognize. 45 seconds remaining. Even if you succeed, it changes nothing, the Zephyrian said, but Sarah could hear uncertainty in its voice now. One communication array among hundreds, one minor tactical victory in a war your species is losing. You're probably right, Sarah admitted, but that's not really the point anymore, is it? She gestured toward her camera, which was still recording. The device had been broadcasting everything to the human fleet's communication network. Somewhere in space, aboard human ships and bases, people were watching this conversation in real time. You studied our culture, but you missed the most important part. Humans don't just fight with weapons and tactics. We fight with ideas, with symbols, with stories that inspire others to keep fighting when everything seems hopeless. 35 seconds. The Zephyrian leader finally understood. The broadcast you have been transmitting. Every word, every image. Right now, humans across 12 star systems are watching a war correspondent face down the alien leader who thought our species was too weak to threaten him. They're seeing that ordinary people can become extraordinary when they have to. Sarah smiled, and for the first time since the ambush began, she felt genuinely at peace. You see, you made a strategic error. You ambushed a squad of rangers, thinking you were just eliminating a minor threat. But you also ambushed their embedded journalist. And journalists are far more dangerous than soldiers when properly motivated. 25 seconds. The alien warriors were getting agitated, chittering among themselves in their own language. Sarah couldn't understand the words, but their body language was clear. They wanted to retreat before the explosion. Their leader held up a claw for silence, its attention focused entirely on Sarah now. You would die for a gesture, for symbolism. I would die for hope, Sarah corrected. Because hope is the one weapon your species doesn't understand. You conquer through fear, through overwhelming force, through proving that resistance is futile. But humans are stubborn. We keep fighting lost causes because someone has to. 15 seconds. Besides, Sarah added conversationally, who says I'm planning to die? In one fluid motion, she dove toward the nearest piece of cover, a rocky outcropping about 20 meters away. The Zephyrian warriors opened fire immediately, energy bolts turning the air around her into superheated plasma. 10 seconds. Sarah hit the ground hard, rolling behind the rocks just as the alien leader screamed orders for retreat. She could hear the Zephyrians' clawed feet scrambling against stone as they tried to reach minimum safe distance. 5 seconds. Sarah pressed herself against the rock and covered her head. Through her earpiece, she could hear Captain Tor's voice, weak but determined. Chen, you magnificent crazy woman, I can't believe you actually pulled this off. 3 seconds. The last thing Sarah heard before the explosion was the sound of human dropships approaching from orbit. The cavalry was arriving, drawn by her broadcast, coming to extract the surviving rangers and complete the mission. 2 seconds. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. She had started this day as a war correspondent. She was ending it as something else entirely. 1 second. The explosion lit up the alien landscape like a miniature sun. When the blast wave passed, Sarah found herself partially buried under debris but miraculously alive. The rocky outcropping had protected her from the worst of it, though her ears were ringing and her head felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. The communication array was gone, replaced by a crater filled with the twisted remains of crystalline technology. In the distance, she could see the Zephyrian survivors retreating toward their own positions, their tactical advantage lost. Chen, report. Morrison's voice crackled through her damaged earpiece. Still here, Sarah croaked, spitting dust from her mouth. Array destroyed, mission accomplished. The human dropships were landing now, their engines scattering the alien grass as Marines poured out to secure the area. Medical teams rushed toward the ranger positions, while combat engineers began setting up defensive positions. As Sarah struggled to her feet, she saw Captain Tor's being loaded onto a stretcher. The sniper was pale and weak, but his eyes were bright with something that hadn't been there before the mission started. "Chen," he called out as the medics carried him past. "That was the finest piece of soldiering I've ever seen. You sure you want to go back to being a reporter?" Sarah looked at her battered camera, somehow still functioning despite everything it had been through. The recording light was still blinking. The story was still being transmitted across human space. Already she could imagine the headlines, the broadcasts, the way this moment would be remembered and retold. A war correspondent who fired 11 perfect shots and then faced down alien leaders with nothing but words and explosives. But more importantly, she could imagine the effect those stories would have. Young people watching her broadcast and deciding to enlist. Colonial governors finding the courage to resist Zephyrian ultimatums. Scientists and engineers working harder to develop new weapons and defenses. Stories had power. They could change minds, inspire courage, turn the tide of wars. Sarah had always known that in the abstract. Today, she had learned it in the most direct way possible. "Reporter," Sarah asked, shouldering her camera and walking toward the extraction zone. "Tours, I think I just discovered that I've been both all along. I just needed the right story to tell." Behind her, the crater continued to smoke, its destruction already becoming legend. The legend lives on. 3 months after the Battle of Kepler 442b, Sarah Chen sat in a broadcast studio on Luna Station, watching her own story play out on screens across human space. The footage from that day had been edited into a documentary that was being transmitted to every human settlement, every military base, every colonial outpost in known space. The Reporter's War, they were calling it. The story of an embedded journalist who fired 11 perfect shots and then talked her way through the most dangerous standoff in recent military history. Sarah touched the small scar on her forehead, a souvenir from the explosion that had destroyed the Zephyrian communication array. The doctors had offered to remove it completely, but she had decided to keep it. Some scars were worth preserving. 30 seconds to air, the production assistant announced. Sarah straightened her jacket and looked into the camera. This would be her first live interview since returning from the war zone, and the entire Human Defense Network had cleared their programming schedules to carry it. The interviewer was Marcus Webb, a veteran journalist himself who had covered 3 previous alien conflicts. He understood the weight of what Sarah had accomplished out there. "We're live in 5, 4, 3. The red light on the camera activated, and suddenly Sarah was speaking to billions of humans across dozens of star systems. "Good evening," Marcus began. "I'm here with Sarah Chen, the war correspondent whose actions on Kepler 442b have become legendary throughout human space. Sarah, let's start with the obvious question. You went from observer to participant in a matter of minutes. What changed?" Sarah had been asked this question hundreds of times during the debriefings, but she had never given a completely honest answer until now. "I realized that objectivity is a luxury," she said. "When you're facing extinction, when brave people are dying around you for principles you claim to believe in, neutrality becomes a form of cowardice. Sometimes the story demands that you become part of it." Marcus leaned forward. "Your footage from that day has been viewed over 2 billion times. Military recruiters report a 300% increase in enlistments. Colonial governors who were considering surrender have instead chosen to fight. How does it feel to know that your 11 shots may have changed the course of the war?" Sarah shook her head. "It wasn't my 11 shots that changed anything. It was the choice to stop hiding behind my camera and start taking responsibility for what I witnessed. The shots were just the tool. The real weapon was the story itself." "Speaking of which," Marcus continued, "you've had offers from every major news network in human space. Book deals worth millions of credits, movie rights that would make you wealthy for life, but you're going back to the front lines instead. Why?" Sarah smiled, the same expression she had worn while facing down the Zephyrian leader. "Because the story isn't over yet. What happened on Kepler 442b was just the beginning. The Zephyrians underestimated humanity because they didn't understand what drives us. They saw our divisions, our conflicts, our apparent weaknesses, and assumed we were easy prey." She gestured toward the screens showing footage from recent battles. Human forces were winning now, pushing the aliens back on multiple fronts. The tide of the war had indeed turned. But they missed the most important thing about humans. When we're truly threatened, when our survival is at stake, we don't just fight with weapons and ships. We fight with ideas, with stories, with the absolute refusal to accept that anyone has the right to decide our species doesn't deserve to exist. Marcus nodded. What's your message to the humans watching tonight, particularly those in the outer colonies who are still under threat? Sarah looked directly into the camera, speaking to people she would never meet but whose lives depended on the choices they made in the coming months. My message is simple. Every one of you has 11 perfect shots in you. Maybe they're actual bullets, maybe they're decisions, maybe they're words spoken at the right moment. But when the time comes, when everything falls apart and people are depending on you, those shots will be there. She paused, remembering the weight of the pistol in her hands, the moment when she stepped out from behind cover and into the fight. I was just a reporter. I had never killed anything in my life. I was supposed to watch and document, not participate. But when the moment came, when good people were dying and the mission was failing, I discovered something about myself, something about all of us. Sarah leaned forward, her voice growing stronger. Humans don't just survive because we're clever or adaptable. We survive because when everything is lost, when all the professionals are down and all the plans have failed, ordinary people will step up and do extraordinary things. Not because they're heroes, but because they're human. The interview continued for another 20 minutes, covering technical details about the battle, updates on the war's progress, and Sarah's plans for her next embedded assignment. But those words became the soundbite that echoed across human space. Every one of you has 11 perfect shots in you. Over the following weeks, the phrase appeared on recruitment posters, colonial resistance broadcasts, and even graffiti on transport ships. It became a rallying cry for a species that had finally remembered how to fight for its survival. 6 months later, the Zephyrian Empire requested a ceasefire. Their leadership had concluded that humans were too unpredictable, too willing to sacrifice themselves for abstract principles, too dangerous to conquer completely. The war wasn't over, but humanity had bought itself time to prepare, to unite, to become the species it needed to be to survive in a hostile galaxy. Sarah Chen continued covering the conflict from the front lines, but she was no longer just an observer. She had become something new, a warrior journalist, someone who understood that sometimes the most powerful weapon in war wasn't a gun or a bomb, but a story told at exactly the right moment. Her camera still recorded everything, but now it was wielded by someone who knew that neutrality was a choice, and that choice had consequences. She had fired 11 perfect shots and discovered that words could be weapons too. The legend of those 11 shots spread beyond humanity, carried by traders and diplomats to other species throughout the galaxy. Aliens began to speak of humans not as weak mammals, but as the species crazy enough to turn their storytellers into soldiers when survival was at stake. And in the end, maybe that was the most human thing of all, the refusal to accept that anyone else got to write the ending to their story. Sarah Chen had learned that lesson on a battlefield far from Earth, with an empty pistol in her hand and a camera that captured the moment when a war correspondent became a legend. 11 perfect shots, each one a choice a step toward becoming who humanity needed her to be. The story lived on, inspiring others to find their own 11 shots when the moment demanded it, because that's what humans do. They tell stories that change the world.